It is 6:30. Good evening. This is an informal meeting of the Gardner City Council on Tuesday, September 5th, 2023. I would like to ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Councilor Boone. Councilor Craig Cormier.
Present.
Councilor Rhonda Cormier.
Present.
Councilor Jarlowitz.
Present.
Councilor Harder.
Present.
Councilor Heath.
Present.
Councilor Mack. Councilor Tassone.
Present.
Councilor Tyros.
Present.
Councilor Walsh. And President Kaczynskis.
Present. Thank you. Councilor Walsh and Councilor Mack did tell us they were not going to be present this evening. We'll begin with the first item on the agenda. Well, first, is anyone here recording tonight's meeting? Okay, no one's recording. The first item on the agenda is a communication from Economic Development Coordinator Jessica Droy requesting an informal meeting regarding district improvement financing, or DIF. For the public watching this evening, we are meeting informally tonight on this first item for a presentation by Camoin Associates regarding a district improvement financing DIF study, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. You want me here?
Yep, just the microphone will pick up for the people watching at home.
Perfect. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. Hello to everybody in the back. I'm sorry, I have my back to you. My name is Rachel Selsky. I am here again from Camoin Associates. We've been working with Jessica and Trevor, as well as Mass Development, on analyzing the opportunity for the City of Gardner around a district improvement financing plan. And so through that, we came in June. I was here in June to kind of give you the overview, and I'm here again to share more about the specifics of the analysis that we did and the results of that analysis for your consideration. So tonight's agenda, I'll give you an update on the project status. I'll go over just briefly what district increment or improvement financing is. I'll talk about the Gardner DIF master plan, and then we can have time for questions and discussion as well. You can go to the next slide. Yep, go ahead. So far, there has been the identification of two distinct districts. There's the Downtown Development District and the Mill Street Development District. You'll see later in the presentation the maps of these districts, but these align with districts that you had previously identified in terms of urban renewal plans, and so the parcels are aligned. From there, we worked through a grant from Mass Development to assist with preparation of the district improvement financing documents. So that included a build-out scenario to identify what could potential new projects come online within these districts, to build out a DIF revenue model to understand how those new projects might generate new funding or revenue, a DIF expense model, which identified what new public projects might be funded by that new revenue and how those compare, so the revenue versus the expenses. And then finally, we prepared a DIF master plan, which really outlines the where, the what, the why of district improvement financing for Gardner. So all of that has been prepared so far. We've been working very closely with our contact at Mass Development, as well as Jessica and Trevor here with the city. So what is a DIF? So a DIF allows some or all of future property tax revenue from development to be dedicated to support infrastructure, public improvement projects, or programs related to economic development. It's a very specific type of financing plan or tool that cities in Massachusetts can use to fund projects that they think will catalyze economic development and growth of tax revenue within a particular district. You can go to the next slide. So it is not a new tax. It is not a special assessment. It does not add on top of the property owner's existing tax rate. What it does do is it allows capturing of some or all of future property tax revenue from development to be dedicated to support those types of projects that the community wants to see. It really ties projects and programs that catalyze that economic growth and new tax revenue to projects that will benefit and create additional momentum around economic growth and economic opportunity. So it's about capturing some of that revenue to pay for certain public investment projects. These are some terms that you might hear me use. So a development district is the physical kind of map or boundary of where the development is to occur. It's those parcels that we'll see in a map to come. The development program is what the city or municipality wants to spend the money on. So what are the intended expenses that would be paid for through the revenue from the district. New growth is the increase in assessed value within the development district that is expected as a result of this investment. And then tax increment revenue is the additional increase revenue that the municipality will see as a result of the increase in assessed value, the new growth, and then the taxing on that. And then the city has the opportunity to allocate some of that new revenue to fund the programs. This chart here shows the flow of funds within a DIF. So you can see the tax increment revenue would come in. It first flows into the development program fund. If you specifically pledge DIF revenues to general obligations or special obligation debt, you make sure you deposit enough of the funds into the development sinking account to meet that year's obligation. Principal and interest is paid from that account. Creating those bond documents is something you would choose to do with your legal counsel when you issue bonds. Another option, and I think something that is more appropriate for the city of Gardner, is that you would just create the project cost account, where funds from the tax increment revenue would flow into that project cost account to pay for the expenses associated with what you want to do with the DIF revenue. So that can then flow into individual project costs, and a portion of that can also flow into the municipal general fund. So if in the end you evaluate your accounts and your future needs, if you have too much in that project cost account, you can sweep excess funds into the general fund at that time. So if certain year you have more or excess funds, you can amend your development program and make some changes to how the specifics of the funds flow. And so that allows you some flexibility there as well. I just want to make sure it's not all written in stone. This would help establish a master plan, but it is flexible down the road. So then, so as part of this, we did need to create a DIF master plan. So we created them for both the downtown development district as well as the Mill Street district. The goal of the plan is to capture tax revenue that's generated by expected economic development and direct those revenues to pay for the city's efforts that will make the city and the district more attractive for business residents and visitors by attracting new private investments, capturing new tax revenues from that private development, and communicating to the larger region that the city of Gardner has targeted areas that they are focused on strategic growth and is also making its own investment. So it's a really good tool to also communicate to the larger audience that the city of Gardner is taking steps and efforts to attract investment and improve the overall economic conditions within the city. You can go to the next slide. So here you can see the two districts. The first is the Downtown Development District. This aligns with the city's urban renewal district as well. And then the next slide is the Mill Street District. These are the two districts that were identified for the DIF master plans. The top table there, this is really just to show what type of use is currently within those two districts and how many parcels are within the districts. The top one is the downtown district. It has 142 total acres. The vast majority is identified as commercial. The lower table is the Mill Street District that has 57 or so acres. Again, 10 of the parcels, the largest number, are commercial, followed pretty quickly by industrial. The city of Gardner has over 14,000 total acres. The DIF would capture 1.41% of the city's overall acres. The state requires that no more than 25% of the city's acreage be in a DIF. So this is just to show that you're well within that requirement. So the next table here is to really get more towards the build-out analysis that we did. So a major part or role that Camoin Associates played in this was to help identify what is the potential build-out for those two districts. What are the likely projects that would come down the pipeline? Both those that we know about, that the city knows about, that's kind of in the works, there's been conversation about them, but also mid and long term. Where are there parcels that could be fully built out to their potential or are currently underutilized that could be built out, and what would likely be generated from that? So we always start first with the projects that are known or that are within the pipeline. And so we worked closely with the city to help us identify which parcels within the district, within each of the districts, are most likely to have some kind of new growth or a project or new private investment that would increase their assessed value. And where are they, what is their estimated completion date, so that we can look out into the future about when these new assessed values might come online. So for the two districts, there are known projects, and we worked with the city and the city's assessor to identify what would that new growth and assessed value be. So in total, the downtown district is expected to see over 17 million in new growth, and the Mill Street nearly 6 million. So these are from known projects that were identified for us. So this would be the new growth. This would be the assessed value, not the revenue generated from it, but the overall new growth that's been identified. The next slide is where we need to think out beyond those known projects. There are other parcels within the two districts that are currently underutilized. And so we do a review of the GIS data to identify within the parcels, within the two districts, where is there limited future development potential because it's, because it's not developable, or it's currently fully utilized, or it's a public facility. Those are not we don't include those as likely to be developed. But then we look at the other parcels and we identify where potentially in the mid and long term there could be some development potential. We do a real estate market analysis, we look at your region, and we try to understand where could the market go and where would there be likely some demand. And so we do an analysis and we identify within the downtown district as well as the Mill Street district the number of parcels that would likely be redeveloped in the mid and the long term. And so we identified from this analysis that overall that there are both known project, mid-term development potential parcels as well as long-term potential parcels. And that helps us with our build-out analysis. So we transfer all of that into understanding, really focusing only on the parcels that we expect to be built from those known projects as well as the mid and long term. We're able to estimate the new total assessed value of these parcels, again, to identify what the build-out potential is. You'll see in the known projects, we remember the 17 million and the nearly 6 million from the previous table. So that's the new assessed value that we would expect from those known projects. But we apply some assumptions for a low growth and a high growth scenario for the mid and long term potential to identify what the new growth could be in the downtown as well as the Mill Street district through 2037. That's kind of the near to longer term potential that we look for. And these are the numbers that we use to get to the new assessed value that will generate the new revenue. So that's the revenue side of things, trying to understand what the new district revenue could look like. Going into the next slide, this is where we're starting to look at the expenses. So for the downtown, the city was able to provide us with a series of projects that would be considered. We applied some assumptions to them about how they might be funded, interest rates, the percent of the DIF revenue that would be going to pay for those expenses, and identifying other sources of revenue. So for the downtown district, there was about $21 million worth of projects identified within that district, and within the Mill Street, about $4.5 million. So we use these two sets of expenses to estimate what are the annual costs associated with these projects getting built out. And these tables awful, and you all have it in your materials, but really what it is trying to tell you is it is at this point comparing the estimated revenues that would come from the DIF to the estimated expenses. So the first column is showing you the fiscal year, and we are showing both that low growth and high growth scenario. So the first column is the fiscal year. The second column looks at the annual expense associated with the DIF development program. So you remember we had all those DIF projects that were identified for the downtown district, and we made all those assumptions to understand what that fiscal year annual expense would be. The next column, the 75%, shows the assumed percentage of new growth revenue that would go to the DIF fund. We stuck with 75% throughout, assuming that 75% of the new growth would go to the DIF fund and 25% would go to the general fund. DIF revenue column is the new revenue that would be allocated to the DIF fund to pay for the development program. You can see there is a significant gap between the fiscal year expense and the DIF revenue that is expected to be generated. And then the final column would be the 25% that goes to the general fund. You can see in the end that there is about $8.5 million that does come from DIF revenues to pay for the expenses, but that there is still need for additional investments and other sources of revenue like grants and other programs to pay for the series of projects that were identified to be paid for through the funds. So that's the downtown. Did a very similar analysis for the Mill Street project. You can see the DIF revenue would generate about $2.75 million in new DIF revenue. But again, there is a gap in terms of the new expenses versus the new revenue that would come in. And so again, additional revenue sources would be needed to pay for those expenses. So we also looked at, in the master plan, we looked at and outlined the DIF management of the overall DIF, and we identified the development of a DIF advisory committee that would include representation from the economic development coordinator, the director of community development and planning, the assessor, representative from public works, and either the treasurer or auditor would be on this advisory committee, who would be responsible for overseeing the projects, overseeing any public-private partnerships, and making sure that the DIF revenues are, accurately calculated and monitored from year to year. So all of this is captured in the DIF master plan that we've been working through with Mass Development, as well as with Jessica and Trevor with the city. And that is, at this point, it is in draft phase, and it's up to the city to kind of adjust or make a decision about whether to move forward with creation of the DIF plan at this time.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yes.
Are there any questions, comments from the City Council?
Madam President,
Councilor Boone?
if my numbers are approximate, it seems like the city would have to come up with some $17 million or more or less to be able to support everything. I'm not saying we're going to do everything. So it's certainly, definitely a concern how we would come up with that kind of money. I just wanted to point that out. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Counselor. Go ahead,
Mayor.
Jacqueline.
Counselor, just to adjust that, one of the biggest funding sources for this will just be grants through the Planning and Development, Community Development Department for all these various projects. These are all long-term projects as well, just trying to compile as many that we know of that we're seeking to do, so they won't all be happening at once. It'll be over the course of now through 2037, and we will be seeking federal, state, and other funding sources through grants and otherwise.
And Mr. Roy, your department already looks for grants and already does grant writing. That's already part of the department's process, correct?
Yes.
Counselor, anything further?
Just a follow-up.
Sure.
So in your process of looking for grants, are you confident that we're going to be able to get several of the grants to try and help with our moving forward?
Yes, 100%. We've done so in the past. I have confidence we'll be able to do so in the future.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Tyros?
Thank you, Madam President. Many slides previously. I saw it was recommended that not more than 25% of the city's land be included in the DIF plan. I think we were at 1.4%.
Yes,
1.4%.
correct.
Should we be looking to expand? Does that make sense, or are we in a kind of a sweet spot right now?
Yeah, so it's up to the city about how to draw the boundaries. Capturing more land would give you a greater geography from which to capture that assessed growth, growth in assessed value. I think it was smart to align with the current urban renewal boundaries because it does give some confidence in that there is a plan for this district and we are all working in the same direction rather than just like, we're just trying to capture everything and we're, just scattershot. I think it does communicate a plan and this is a tool to achieve that plan. So that is, so I think it was a smart move. You could absolutely expand, but I do think you would want to just consider what does that then communicate to the larger area.
In other words, we're being smart and selective.
Yes.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Counselor.
And if I could just add one other thing. So the DIF is a really interesting and flexible tool. And in a similar way that it seems really scary to see those numbers where there is a big gap between the revenue and the expenses, it is smart to include things that you think you might want to do in the DIF master plan so that then you can down the road use the funds to pay for them without needing to come back and do a big amendment to the master plan. So having it in there doesn't mean you have to do it, but not having it in there would mean that you would need to then take steps to do an amendment, which is not the end of the world, but it is smarter to go add more than less in the master plan.
Thank you. Further questions, comments from the City Council? Now, I have a question, Rachel. So this is the second time that you've been here, and I know you've been working with the Community Development Department. What's the next steps? Like, what happens next?
Yeah,
would
absolutely.
do we vote? Like, would we take a vote on this, or can you just?
Yeah, absolutely. So Jessica and Trevor have all the information. I think the next step is for you all to get comfortable with it, but the next step would be to vote to adopt the district and the master plan. That is certainly the next step. It doesn't have to happen immediately. The only timing issue that to be aware of is that any new growth that occurs, you don't want to wait too long and then those projects that are in the pipeline get built and then you're not able to capture that new assessed value as part of the DIF. So there's just a timing issue that I can talk through with Jessica and Trevor and make sure that there's a really good understanding on that. But there's an assessed value, start of the new year, timing issue to be aware of so that you're not missing out on new growth that's occurring in advance of establishing the district.
Thank you. Councilor Cormier?
One brief question. I do know that the state helped us in funding this review. Does this have to be, and it's in draft form, does it have to be accepted or approved by the state before we take action? Or
It does.
after?
It does not actually have to be approved by the state.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor. Further questions, comments from the City Council? Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Roy. Our second item on this evening's agenda is item 11024, a communication from the Community Development and Planning Director relative to an update to the open space and recreation plan. This was in the City Council and referred to the Council as a Committee of the Whole on June 20th. We had asked for more time at our July and August regular meetings, and we're here today in our informal meeting to discuss it further. We have Community Development Planning Director Trevor Biergard is here to answer any questions. Is there any questions, comments from the City Council on the item 4? Mr. Biergard? Councilor Heath?
Yes, I'd just like to know, I mean, unless I missed it, has there been any changes that have been made since, was it June 20th?
Trevor, just want to come up here for the microphone. Thank you.
I believe the question was whether there's any changes made since the last time the plan was in front of the council.
Correct. Yes.
No.
All right. May-
Go ahead.
All right, so I just want to go ahead and make sure, again, I said it then, I'll say it again now, that the accuracy is right. There was questions against on the June 1st planning board meeting where there was questions about the accuracy. And as we know, me personally, and I'll take this personal, one of the items that I brought to the table that will be brought later, there's a problem with the accuracy on that. So going forward, I just want to make sure that the accuracy that we have, that I'm going to put my name on, is correct. Is there any guarantee that that's correct?
As far as I know, the plan's accurate. I'm not sure what you're specifically talking about, referencing, as far as being inaccurate. If I knew, I could probably address it. But as far as I know, Councilor, everything in the plan is accurate. And it's really an iteration of previous plans. And all we're doing is basically updating the goals and objectives. So all the projects that we've already completed in the old plan, we actually eliminate, and then we create new projects based on the public input we receive, the knowledge from within our departments. So basically, everything we see here is consistent with previous plans, albeit some of it's updated. And so I would consider it fairly accurate because it dates back 20 plus years, at least the current plan to 2000. And there were 2 plans previous to that were done in different formats, dating back to 1986.
All right, but, so you can understand why I'm questioning, right? I mean, we had some discrepancies in accuracy over 100 years ago, and we're dealing with that today.
Again, I don't know what you're talking about, so I really can't address it.
That's all.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you.
Further questions, comments from the City Council? Councilor Tyros?
Thank you, Madam President. Director Biergard, I was reviewing the plan in section 5 is inventory of lands, section 5.1, and I noticed on the 5th bullet, all the other bullets kind of made sense where on the inventory of lands, it explained specifically why items were protected in perpetuity, which I thought was great, either by deed restrictions, which I believe is something Councilor Heath was previously referring to, either by special taxation programs, Chapter 61, 61A, 61B, or that lands were acquired for watershed and aquifer protection, which is also Councilor Heath is referring to. But the fourth bullet says, lands that have been identified and used by the city as open space and recreation for an extensive time frame are usually permitted, protected, open space. And I was wondering, kind of the impetus for that bullet being added, if that's following any certain language. Can you speak to that?
Do you know what page that's on? 'Cause I'm really, I don't know.
The inventory, it's 5-1. I don't see a page number.
So is that something you're
I'm just wondering where
speculating
that.
that's been added in, or?
Yeah, it
if
looks like
was
it's been
from a
added in.
Previous plan.
It was not in previous plans,
Okay.
so that's why I was wondering where that language came from, if it's something recommended by the state or other federal or other agencies, just to understand, because all the other reasons for permanent protection seem pretty specific, but this one seems more broad.
No, I don't know where that came from. This is the old plan.
I just got this off the city website. Oh, sure. That'd be great.
Councilor Tyrus, you're referring to bullet point number 4. Lands that have been identified and used by the city as open space or recreation for an extensive time frame are usually permanently protected open space.
Correct.
When you say that that appears relatively broad, that is consistent with the Smith v. Westfield decision that recently came out from the SJC, where the SJC significantly broadened the scope by which public lands are deemed to be public lands subject to Article 97, which is open space recreation. So that would be consistent with that decision from the SJC, which looks not only at deed restrictions, which is now ruled definitively are not the definitive determination of whether or not these protections apply to a land, but it also looks at the use to which the municipality has put the land over a period of time. So that would be consistent with that new decision from the SJC.
And that could have been a result of our working sessions, it could have been our consultant recommending we put that in based on what Attorney Finch just mentioned.
That's great. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
On new Article 97 legislation.
I was going to say that's great because I personally don't like the phrase usually when it comes to documents like these because
Like what? I'm sorry?
the phrase usually when it comes to documents like this because it creates a little bit of ambiguity and it's important that these lands be protected if they've rightfully been designated. So
Well, the law lives in a world of ambiguity.
our job to interpret it, isn't it?
Thank you, City Solicitor Flick. Thank you, Director Beauregard. Councilor Tyros, do you have any further?
That answers my
questions?
question. Thank you.
Thank
Madam
you. Further questions, comments from the City Council? Councilor Boone?
Thank you, Madam President. This is still in front of the planning board for study and report, correct?
I'm sorry, what was
The
the
open space plan, is it still in front of the planning board for study and report? I don't believe it is. I believe it's with us. This is
Yes.
for our endorsement.
Yeah, so yeah, this is for the city council's endorsement. The planning board's actually already voted to endorse. So has the Conservation Commission.
Thank you. Councilor Boone?
Thank you.
Councilor Ron Cormier?
If I'm not mistaken, endorsements are asked for, but not necessarily required, from a variety of sources, including the mayor, obviously the council, Conservation Commission, planning board, MRPC, and DCS. Historically, it has been endorsed by the number of, and I did serve on, as a disclaimer, I did serve on this review board this time, but not all of them that have, we've had historically before. One of the things I did ask the mayor were we required to have an endorsed plan for applications on grants. He did indicate to me in conversation that there are some types of grants that do require an endorsed open space plan to make the grant feasible and acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor.
So Council Cormier is correct. Historically, we've asked the planning board, Conservation Commission, and City Council, and MRPC, our regional planning commission, to endorse the plan. The only endorsement that's needed, that's required by the state, is the mayor. But I think in the past and currently, it's important to have all the buy-in of all the commissions and boards and councils that are going to be involved with the process to have buy-in at the beginning. A lot of these projects are funded through the city, and the council needs to appropriate those funds, so having the council's buy-in up front is important. And just the understanding of the plan and the projects that we've identified.
Thank you. Further questions, comments from the city council? Director Beauregard, you mentioned the plan being updated and so many times. Is it a consistent number of years that it's updated, or do they just request it? Is it like 6 or 7 years?
It's a 7-year plan. Ours expired back in August of last year. We actually started the process in April of last year. We've had 2 public hearings since, one in August of last year and then one in June of this year, to get to where we are now with the final draft plan.
Thank you.
It's a 7-year plan and will be good through, if approved by the state, through 2030.
Thank you. Further questions, comments from the city councilors? Thank you, Director Beauregard.
Thank you.
Any further comments or questions on the topics of the informal meeting by the city council? Okay, thank you, councilors. Hearing nothing, we will close this part of the meeting and reconvene at 7:30 for our regular meeting. Thank you.